Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome again to this second occasion in English and the third one with these meetings and conversations thanks to Lech Lecha. Today we will try to develop probably something which is a challenge for Islam, for religion, for sacred spirituality in the West, or rather in Europe, and specifically according to the Italian context and example, how religion, how the sacred, how is integrated or related to contemporary philosophical, social, political involvements and engagements and situations in terms of citizenship, so in terms of international relations. So in order to try to give you some points on the challenges, I could start probably through the issue on is Islam, is Muslim presence and witness something which is consistent or respected or acknowledged as a Western European Italian presence, or is it something that unfortunately is still considered as foreign or linked to the Arab world, or something that has nothing to do with the contemporary social Western secular democratic mindset? So this would be one point. The other one is, of course, the misconception or the prejudice on Islam and Muslims in terms of negative images and stereotypes, which means that is Islam, are Muslims all terrorists, all criminals, and if there are some criminals and terrorists, does this shadow and cancel all the historical, spiritual, intellectual and philosophical heritage of Islamic civilization and the richness of our religious doctrine? So this could be another challenge, if I may say. And the third one would be, do we have to prove in order to be recognized and respected in equal terms of dignity as Western European Italian citizens, do we have to shape a new so-called moderate Islam, which has to have something that has to be easygoing, open-minded in the sense of a very liberal interpretation of religion, and if I may say very superficial knowledge of the deep symbolic values and teachings of the masters and of the prophets according to a religious doctrine as Islam teaches. So these are, I think, the three challenges, unfortunately, if I may say, we face in Europe, in the West, in contemporary times, and of course the goal we would like to express is that in reality there is a misconception not only on Islam but on what is religion and what is the sacred and what is spirituality, and how spirituality can inspire the behaviors and the thinking and the development of relations through religious believers, through religious believers and European citizens, by religious believers, European citizens and persons of different cultures and of different experiences in the challenges of contemporary society according to the modernity, tradition, East, West, and religion and liberal or secular perspective. So I think this is the true challenge, because one misconception is that religion has to be something linked to the past. So to be modern is to be a citizen or a person who has in somehow overcome old traditional doctrinal philosophical heritage, where at the center of mankind and of human and of the life there was a concentration and an inspiration on the divine. So the risk is that modernity is erasing any reference to sacred religious doctrine and spirituality and divinity and God. And so the true challenge would be how religious believers and Muslim believers as well in contemporary society, which is in somehow influenced by modernity, can be consistent with this new way of considering life without living in a artificial dimension between being a believer and being a Westerner. And I think that one of the teachings of our masters would be that, of course, history is developing, and we are not anymore living in the Middle Ages, we're not anymore living in classical times, we're not anymore living in different kind of political systems or even philosophical systems or even confessional states. We're living in secular, national, democratic political systems. We're living in a much more, if I may say, developed or pluralistic cultural and philosophical engagement and development, but this does not erase, rather it reshapes probably the sensitivity of a true believer, that could be in Judaism or in Christianity or in Islam or any other religion, that has to reframe his consistency as a believer in the context of a modern liberal democratic society. So the true challenge is to avoid, if I may say, to interpret a liberal society or a democratic system or modernity as something that is in contrast with a spiritual religious identity. So the true challenge is to find ways to be consistent with a dimension of life, with a sensitivity where we believe in God, we believe in Allah and in the prophets, we believe in the teachings of the prophets and the masters that have inspired the heritage of some implementations of doctrine through history and through geography, through the West and through the East. And so we have to try to follow this implementation, this development, even at a philosophical level, in the new context which is developing. So we are not anti-modern, but nevertheless we should also have a critical way of considering modernity, democracy, liberal society, in order to avoid that these three interpretations might become extremist interpretations against a religious, sacred, confessional, spiritual orientation in life, which is not true, because according to the principles of a liberal society or of democracy, the freedom of religion is part of the basics of this orientation. So we should not consider us in conflict with this new dimension, or as a reaction pretend to reinstore or to have a revival of confessional states or Sharia-oriented juridical systems. I think the essence of Sharia are the maqasid, which means the essence of Sharia. The main goals of Islamic law are those to try to be consistent with the roots of our religion, rather than try to concentrate on all the details of any kind of juridical interpretation in the context of our life or of society. So, and on the other side, the other challenge would be, do we have to moderate our faith? Do we have to be moderate in our consistency of being religious believers? Unfortunately, this might be a challenge, and then there again it is a challenge, according to me, in terms of more of behavior, but also of a philosophical dimension, which means that sometimes in this liberal Western society, religion is criticized, is even thought as the cause for conflicts, or it is in somehow those who pretend to be still very religious are the object of being ridiculized by the mainstream of non-religious citizens or persons. And I think that there again we have a challenge, because we have to not make our faith or our belief moderate. We have to be consistent and concentrated with our religious identity, which does not mean that this has to become a formalistic identity. Religion is something that has to inspire especially the open-heartedness, and then the open-mindedness, and then a way of behaving in society according to a concentration on the sacred virtues of our doctrine, through a peaceful and constructive and wise vision and action in society. So to be a very deep religious believer does not mean to have to show off our religious identity in terms of very formal or exterior practices. It means especially to, if I may say, try to believe and to deepen the values of a spiritual dimension in life, the deep reason of life, which is this search for the presence of the divine in our action and in our relation with the other believer. And so, of course, it might happen to have many situations where, with institutions, with professors, with families, with employees, with colleagues, with parents, another kind of philosophical or orientation that is not so interested on the divine or on sacred or on religion might put us in a challenge. But this is the way, through dialogue and through cooperation, where a believer and a non-believer, a deep believer and a believer that did not still find ways to implement in harmony his religious identity in society, might find ways to live together and to work for a better world in the context of their friendship, or their professional cooperation, or of their social engagement. And I think this is the main point. Otherwise, we will create so-called artificial religious ghettos, where each one behaves in his artificial context according to a confessional formalistic orientation, and we will not be speaking or living next to the other, because we were thinking that all the others are in somehow challenging our own identity. And so in order to prevent this attack, or this confrontation, we rather protect ourselves, living in a very narrow-minded quarter or situation. And I think this is not the true responsibility we need to practice in all times, and especially in contemporary society in the West. And the last point, of course, would be to try to help the contemporary Western mindset not to confuse the negative examples of some criminals or of some terrorists with the whole religious identity, civilization of Muslims in the East as well as in the West. We have to learn that there are these negative aspects in secular society, in confessional jurisdictions. You have good and bad persons in all religious and non-religious communities. So we have to avoid to generalize or to demonize one single identity because we find that there are some negative examples within that community. And so this can be helped if we learn through education the examples of history and the concrete intellectual and philosophical, artistic, cultural, social richness that have built the West, Europe, Italy, through the engagement of Jews, Christians and Muslims working as believers, working as citizens, working as politicians, as artists, as thinkers, in order to develop their own richness as citizens, but also as believers, and also the development of a common richness of society. I think that if we find this way, the prejudice against the Islamic civilization, or the alibi not to develop our own engagement in Western European, Italian society, will somehow find ways to change. And as the Quran stresses, we should not, if I may say, be concentrated on changing the world. We should be concentrated on changing ourselves. And if we find ways to develop this changement spiritually, intellectually, and also socially, eventually the society and the spread of wisdom might help the changement of a overall society. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.